Welcome, beautiful, to the Creating Change podcast with Emma Bradford. Creating change to fall back in love with ourselves and life. Each episode, I'll be offering insightful stories, concepts, and practical takeaways to inspire your day, reconnecting to the authentic essence within. Are you ready, lovely, to embrace yourself even more and awaken to the magic life has to offer? Let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome to Creating Change with Emma Bradford. Thank you so much for joining me today for this very special episode. I know I say that often, though today is a celebration of 50 episodes. This podcast has been going for almost 2 years now. Can you believe that? I certainly can't. I find it very hard to believe that 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago, that I started this podcast, and it still feels like something that's fairly new that I'm still figuring out and getting the hang of things and building it up. And yes, it's just wonderful to have this as 50 episodes. Wow, 50 different episodes, 50 different topics that we've covered. Everything from numerology to soul art to plant medicine to NLP to beliefs to emotions to self-acceptance to self-love and tenderness. Everything. There's been so many different topics, and there's many more to come. Now, for today's episode, as a celebration, I knew that I wanted to do something special for the 50th episode, and I asked my students, I asked the listeners, I asked different people within my networks and communities, like, what questions did they have? Did they have any questions for me? And I would cover them in the special episode of 50 episodes, the celebration. So this will be a Q&A episode, and this will include all the questions that came from listeners, and obviously not all the questions because there's only so much I can fit into a bite-sized episode, though I will include some of the wonderful questions that I feel that many people can benefit from, and I will share some of my thoughts and tips on those as I answer them. So the first question is, what is unconditional love? And how can we love a romantic partner and loved ones unconditionally? Wow, this is a big topic, unconditional love. And this is something I'm still learning, as are many other people on this planet. This is something that I feel very, very few people have got to complete full unconditional love all the time without any influence from the ego, because as we're here in the human experience, we all have ego and soul, and there's the ego. The ego has beliefs, it has thoughts, it has an identity, it has traumas and emotions and all of that. And it can very easily get triggered. It can very easily have conditions on its love that it gives and also that it receives from others. So I'm still figuring this out, and this is not something that I feel that I've got to a place of like, oh, I'm completely unconditionally loving everyone all the time. And I think there are very few people that have actually reached that. Though, what is unconditional love? Like, first of all, unconditional love. When I was reflecting upon this, I was thinking, okay, so love, we can love someone with conditions, like I love you when, or I love you if, or I feel in love when. Like, there are different rules and statements that we have according to that we have linked with that when we love with conditions, like, or that we think certain things need to happen or need to be a certain way in order to feel love, give love, and receive love. So that's love through the eyes of the ego. And there's nothing wrong with that. if that is not harmful or causing pain or suffering for yourself and others. Though many times it does bring up some challenges, because when we are attached to a particular idea, or we put people up on pedestals, or we have hurts and traumas and we close off our love, or we withdraw our love, then that's when it gets a little more challenging. Now, unconditional love, I see as love through the eyes of the soul, is when there's this soul connection, this deeper thread that runs through you and others, and you're loving through that. You're recognizing that as you give and receive love. And it's almost like this very warm, gentle compassion that can feel very profound as well at the same time. Though often the conditional love through the eyes of the ego can be very passionate and volatile. And unconditional love through the eyes of the soul is a lot more steady, a lot more gentle. And that does not mean that it's not powerful. It can be incredibly powerful. Though there's no focus on all of these conditions of you need to do this in order for me to love you, or I need to be a certain way in order to receive love. That's not the main focus. The main focus is seeing you and everyone else as all equal individual sparks of one unified collective consciousness. So there are many different definitions of unconditional love. And just to sum it up very briefly for this podcast episode, and maybe if someone was to ask me this question again in a couple of years' time, maybe I'd have a different answer. Though right now, to sum it up, unconditional love is when you see the bigger picture rather than being caught up in the story and the limitations and the emotions. So you're opening up the perspective and really seeing that deeper thread that runs through everything and everyone, and you're loving through that rather than through the eyes of the identity. And neither one is right or wrong, because obviously we're here in a human experience and we do have the ego for a reason. There are many practices and thoughts out there saying that we need to destroy the ego, get rid of the ego, and the ego is bad. That's not necessarily the case. We have an ego for a reason, so we can really remember who we truly are. If we didn't have any sense of separateness and any sense of identity, we would not want to set goals or achieve things or get things done in this lifetime. We would just sit in a lotus position, meditating the whole time, not get anything done. So the ego does have some importance, though what is not so helpful is when we're allowing it to completely control and run our lives, and through the sense of lack and limitation, which often it does. Now, there's an important side note here, because often, especially in spiritual communities, that there's this tendency to believe that we need to be completely unconditionally loving all the time and free of the ego and just be open and loving all of the time. And I feel that it's really important to reinforce the point of healthy boundaries are important. It's not about being completely open. And I've seen this happen a lot, especially in Tantra communities, that there's this perspective of especially women that they need to be open and unconditionally loving all of the time. And it's so, so fundamental, especially for women, to really have a strong relationship with their body, listen to their intuition, and have healthy boundaries. And you can be unconditionally loving with boundaries. You can be unconditionally loving with saying no as well. So when we're in relationship, it can be very easy to get caught up in the stories and the words and the actions of ourselves and others, and seeing things through the eyes of the soul and through the being can be a wonderful way to not get caught up in that. So obviously we are here, as I said, in a human experience, and we will have some focus on the words and actions, and that's important, though just remembering that deeper essence. And when we interact with loved ones, seeing them as that deeper essence can really help us tap into that more unconditional, loving perspective and feeling and experience. So when we look into their eyes, we can see those eyes blinking back at us. They have a personality, they have a name, they're speaking words, they're carrying out actions, yet at their very core, they are the life that is animating all of that. And when we communicate to that and we relate to that, things can transform. So obviously that's a huge topic, though as this is a Q&A, I'll move on to the next question. So the next question is, how can we navigate breakups before, during, and after? Can you share some personal experiences? Yes, this is a huge topic, and I have mentioned it a few times on YouTube, and also I think some of the podcast episodes previously as well. I mentioned a few things briefly. Though the topic of breakups, that's a very challenging thing to go through. I wouldn't wish it on everyone. It's not nice to go through a breakup. It can be very painful, even if you are the one doing the breaking up. And it's a great, great, great learning experience. It's a huge point of transformation because there's so many things that come up, emotions and thoughts and fears and doubts and everything. And especially if you've been living with a person, or you've been married to the person, or you have children with that other person, there's a lot of things to navigate. So how can we navigate this? So one of the most important things is support. And this was one of the keys for me. Like when I went through a very big breakup a few years ago that was very traumatic, a support circle was key, was so, so important. And I messaged a handful of friends, close friends, and said, hey, look, this is what I'm going through at the moment. And I need checking in on, like, just send me a message every now and again, like over the next few weeks and months, and just check up on me and just send me a message if you can, because that would be greatly appreciated. And I was asking for that support, and that's exactly what they did. And it was so helpful, really, really helpful, because then in those moments where I didn't feel like reaching out, that I was feeling all of the feelings and I needed support, but I didn't feel like sending a message. I had messages coming to me already. I had messages from friends sending me a song or writing a little message just to say that they were thinking of me or asking if we wanted to go for a walk together. That was so helpful. It's important to acknowledge the emotions. So emotions that come up, there can be a lot of emotions, and finding some creative outlet for that is really, really helpful. So one thing that can be incredibly healing is actually writing a letter to the person that you are breaking up with or you have broken up with. Not to give them the letter, though for you to express in the letter. So you get a piece of A4 paper and you write, dear whoever it is, and then you write a letter completely unfiltered. Say everything that you want to say. Swear if you want to. Scribble on that paper if you want to. Let everything out onto that paper. And use that as a way to really start moving all of that emotion and all of those thoughts and fears and doubts and worries, everything out onto the paper rather than being stuck within your mind and within your system. And once you've done that, screw up the paper or safely burn the paper and let that go. This is such a healing thing to do. And sometimes it needs to be done a few times, and sometimes just doing it once is enough. And there are many other ways to process emotions. Dancing, painting, singing, doing exercise is a great one, like moving the body. There are wonderful keys to really help move emotions through the body. And some of those are breath, movement, and sound. So anything that helps to bring those in can really help us to allow those emotions to flow through. And also it's important to notice, how are we talking about the situation? Like, what's the story? What's the story that we're telling ourselves, about the situation, and about the ex-partner or the soon-to-be ex-partner, at whatever level you're in, whatever situation you're in, whatever stage you're at. So what's the story? What's the perspective? Like, how are you talking about things? Because how you talk about things has a knock-on effect on how you feel about things. And whilst in the beginning stages, it can be really helpful to have some form of therapy or support network where you can just talk things out and just release through words and allow everything to come out. There is a time where it's useful to move on, to let that go. That's an old story, and to move on and to start looking forward, to start focusing on you and to let go of any negative stories about the ex-partner, about the situation, and about yourself. And 2 final points about this. So sometimes people want to quickly jump to being friends, and especially in conscious spiritual communities, I've noticed this, that there's this tendency to think that, okay, I'm so unconditionally loving, I'm just going to be friends with you and that's all good and that's fine and everything's okay. And sometimes a period of time of space for you to transition and to move into this new space, this new way of relating is not fully honored. And it can be really, really helpful to have some time of no contact. So there are some relationships where perhaps no contact is exactly what is needed, and that once the relationship ends, that's it. You go in different directions. And if you do want to maintain the friendship, and that is the case for both of you, then having a little bit of time of no contact can be really useful and really healing, just so you can come back to yourselves energetically, emotionally, mentally, at all levels. And then you can rekindle a friendship if it's meant to be. I was in a long-term relationship many, many, many years ago, and we started off as friends. And we had a wonderful relationship, though there were some challenges. And then mutually we came to the decision that it was not meant to be and that we would not continue this relationship. And the ending of that was very challenging, though it was thanks to having a little period of time with no contact that we could just go off in our own directions that has helped us to maintain a solid friendship today. We're still in contact. This person I still consider a very dear friend, and I'm very grateful that we went through everything in the way that we did, that we were able to maintain that friendship. Though that wouldn't have been as easy if we were in contact every single day, all the time, right from the beginning and all the way through the breakup. A period of time of no contact was necessary. And the final tip for navigating heartbreak is tapping into the archetypes, the mother archetype especially. So how can you bring tenderness to yourself? How can you bring gentle, loving presence to yourself? Simply holding yourself or placing a hand over your heart and whispering to yourself, I'm here, rocking from side to side, bringing some comfort to yourself and your body. These are all wonderful things to help you navigate this time of grieving, of heartbreak. So in the past, how I've navigated heartbreak is simply finding a way of creating a support network, like messaging friends, reaching out, seeking that support when I needed it, and coming back to basic self-care. I remember after one of the big breakups that I went through, the only thing I wanted to do in the very beginning was go for walks and bake cakes. That was literally all I could manage. And that was very healing at the time for me to do that, just to be with nature and cook some really wonderful, nourishing, delicious food, and also enjoy baking some cakes too. And that was a wonderful thing that really helped me through that time. And the final question for today's Q&A, and I would love to do more of these. If you have any more questions, then do message me, info@emmabradford.net. So the final question for today's episode is, how do our childhood events affect our relationships? Yes, big one. So what we go through, what we experience in childhood affects our relationships today, because so much of what we experience in childhood, especially between the years of 0 to 7, because that's when we form our blueprint, our map of the world, our belief system. So, for example, when I was younger, and this is not true, but just as an example, if I have a belief that girls are mean, then perhaps I would go through life being affected by female friendships, or if I was in relationship with women, that would be affected if I held on to that within the unconscious mind. Perhaps I would encounter relationships and experiences where I would feel criticized, or I would feel people make hurtful comments, especially women making hurtful comments. And this is something that can show up time and time again, because this is what happens. We have this blueprint, and then as we move through life is simply just mirroring back that blueprint. And if there are certain limitations there, and certain rigid beliefs and limiting beliefs about men or women or people or ourselves or relationships, like, for example, relationships are hard, or relationships are a struggle. Like, that's a very common one I've seen come up time and time again in sessions. And if we hold on to that, that can have a knock-on effect on how we experience relationships. And there's some point in our life when we decided that. And very often it comes from someone else. I often talk about this in terms of backpacks. It's like we picked up a backpack from someone else, and we pick it up and we continue walking through life with that backpack until we get to a point where we need to decide, is this really mine? Is this really true? Is this really necessary? Is this really useful to hold on to? Perhaps I can let that go. Perhaps I can place the backpack down, realize that's not mine at all. I don't choose to move through life with that belief anymore, and move through that. So there are many different ways that we can let those go, whether that's through NLP, hypnosis, coaching, therapy, kinesiology, EFT. There are so many possibilities. My area of expertise is in NLP, and really working with the unconscious mind specifically, because that is where so much happens. And when we rewrite the story within the unconscious, then wonderful shifts can change. So a wonderful way to find hidden limiting beliefs, especially in terms of relationships, is asking ourselves the beginnings of questions and finishing them off. For example, how would you respond to the following beginnings of sentences? Men are, fill in the blank. Women are, fill in the blank. Relationships are, fill in the blank. People are, fill in the blank. You can create a whole long list of all these different beginnings of sentences, and notice what automatically comes up, like what pops up in your mind as you finish that sentence and respond to that. Like, what's the first thing that pops up? If there's anything that's limiting there, anything that's negative, then perhaps that's something to look at if you choose. There's always choice. There's no shoulds here. There's always choice. So if you choose to look at that, you can, and to dive in deeper and get curious. Okay, when did I first decide that? When did I first decide that? Because most of the time it comes from when we were a child, at some point in a situation where we didn't fully understand what was going on, or we felt a sense of hurt or betrayal or sadness or some kind of emotion and experience that we couldn't quite process or understand, or perhaps we were shut down by others or criticized by others, and we decided something in that time. And when we decided that, is like we added this belief to our blueprint, our map that we go through life with. And we can choose to take that off. We can choose to rewrite the story if we want. And that will have a knock-on effect on how we experience relationships. So obviously there's so much more, and we've covered a lot in today's episode, talking about unconditional love, talking about navigating breakups, and talking about relationships in terms of like how it's related to our childhood events and experiences. So there's obviously so much more that I could cover on this, and maybe I do some individual episodes on each of these as well, though this was a little celebratory episode to celebrate 50 episodes and to answer some of your questions. If you have any more questions for me, then do get in touch, info@emmabradford.net. I love hearing from you. I love receiving the questions and seeing what you're really interested in and what you want me to cover. And most of the time, I bring it onto the podcast. So a lot of these episodes are because of requests from listeners. So thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Every single share makes such a difference. So even just sharing this in a WhatsApp to a loved one, this makes such a huge difference to not only those who receive it and that they can then benefit from it, or if not, perhaps they share it with someone else that could benefit from it, though also it helps this podcast to continue. And it really, really helps. And also, if you want this podcast to continue and you really believe in the topics that I'm covering and you want to support this work, then donations are welcome too through PayPal. You can see the link in the description of this podcast. These episodes are not free for me to produce. I do pay out of my own money to produce these and to offer you free content. So the donation is completely optional if you want to help support this, though it's greatly appreciated. And even if it's simply just sharing with a loved one, with a friend, which is completely free to do, that makes such a difference. So thank you so much. I'll be back with the next episode in a couple of weeks. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being you, and wishing you a wonderful rest of the week. Much love. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, beautiful. You're amazing. All resources and links can be found on my website, www.emmabradford.net. Link is in the show description. Do come and join my community and share your takeaways from this episode. I'd really love to hear. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Until next time, I wonder, what magic will you experience in life today?